The gratitude tithe was due and humanity sent an auditor. Commander Eva Rostova stood on the bridge of the starship Arbitrage, a vessel whose name was a promise. She watched the spectral image of Kel Morag Prime resolve in the main tank, a world shimmering under the yoke of a terrible kindness. Beside her, the ship's fleet mind Julian manifested as a column of cool white light, its voice a calm cascade of data. The stakes were simple. A species the Illyri was being systematically bled dry by a legal fiction. The Kel Morag hegemony called it a gratitude tithe, a perpetual tax for their long-ago gift of planetary salvation. It was a debt that could never be paid, only serviced. Now humanity, through the Terran Mandate, was intervening not with warships, but with a public inquiry. Rostova was here to prove that salvation given at the cost of freedom was no salvation at all. Her theater was not the battlefield, but the corridor of law. Julian's synthesized voice was a low hum. Commander, the hegemony has acknowledged our arrival. Prelate Vorlog requests the honor of your presence. He signals peaceful intent, but his fleet's energy signatures suggest a state of high alert. Of course he does. Rostova murmured, her gaze fixed on the shimmering planet. Peace is profitable when you own the bank. Lieutenant Sana, open a channel. Inform the prelate I will meet him, but the inquiry will proceed as scheduled. This ship teaches by numbers and remembers by ledgers, never by callers. The words were a creed, a core tenet of the Mandate's justice fleet. A civilian vignette flickered on a side screen, an intercept from Illyri comms. An elder was teaching a child to count using ration chits, her voice thin and weary. And 10 chits make 1 gratitude unit for the benefactors. She explained, her small hands trembling. We must always show our thanks. The image faded, leaving a silence colder than the void. Rostova's jaw tightened. They were breaking a people on the wheel of their own gratitude. The hegemony's justice was a mirror that only reflected the creditor's smile. Rostova's shuttle descended through Kel Morag's atmosphere, a sky the color of a faded bruise. Below the sprawling capital city was a monument to enforced order, its architecture grand and sterile. The Illyri moved through the streets like ghosts, their once vibrant culture muted by generations of obligation. This was not a society. It was an asset column on a celestial ledger. Prelate Vorlog awaited her in a chamber that was part throne room, part courtroom. He was a towering figure, his species' physiology exuding an aura of serene authority. His robes were the color of freshly spilled blood, embroidered with the complex equations of their tithe laws. He smiled, a gesture that did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. Commander Rostova, an unexpected honor. Does the Terran Mandate find our humble system worthy of such direct attention? The Mandate concerns itself with all systems where the scales of justice are imbalanced. Prelate Rostova replied, her voice even. Your gratitude tithe has raised certain questions. Her first officer, Commander Jian Li, stood at her side, his posture rigid, his hand never far from the data slate that held their case. Vorlog gestured to a series of elaborate data scrolls lining the walls. Our laws are ancient and sacred, Commander. The Illyri were saved from extinction. Is a small token of perpetual thanks too much to ask? He spoke as if the answer was self-evident, a truth as solid as the marble beneath their feet. The law was a weapon, and Vorlog wielded it like a surgeon's scalpel. Rostova met his gaze without flinching. The Mandate has reviewed your sacred laws. A tithe that compounds in perpetuity, that seizes 90% of a species' surplus value, is not a token. It is a collar. She let the word hang in the air, a deliberate and calculated insult. The prelate's smile faltered for a fraction of a second. You speak with the arrogance of a young race commander. You do not understand the complexities of deep time of debts that span millennia. I understand the language of mathematics, Prelate Rostova countered, stepping forward. And your numbers tell a story of enslavement, not salvation. That is why we have called for a public inquiry. Let the Illyri themselves testify to the nature of your benevolence. This was the gambit forcing the proceedings into the open, where the hegemony's methods could be scrutinized by a galactic audience. A quorum of witnesses would be their blade, and truth their killing edge. Before the inquiry could be formally convened, a minor functionary of the hegemony, a nervous bureaucrat named Lai Vek, intercepted Rostova in the grand corridor. He clutched a data puck, his 4 slender hands trembling. "Commander," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "The official ledgers. They are not the only ones. There are mirror ledgers, shadow accounts. The prelate's personal wealth, it is immense." This was the first crack in the hegemony's pristine facade. A mystery seeded. Rostova took the data puck. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, her eyes searching his. Livek flinched. "My mate. She is Illyri. I have watched her spirit fade under the weight of this gratitude. I cannot bear it any longer." He scurried away before she could ask more, melting back into the shadows of the colossal architecture. Back on the arbitrage, Julian analyzed the data. The fleet mine's light column pulsed with a faster rhythm. "The data is genuine, Commander. Prelate Vorlog has been diverting a significant percentage of the tithe into his own private accounts for centuries. He has built a personal empire on the backs of the Illyri." Rostova looked at the numbers flowing across the main screen. The scale of the corruption was breathtaking. It was a new and powerful weapon for their inquiry. "Julian, can you trace the flow of these funds? Can you create a visual representation that a layperson could understand?" "I can create a river of light, Commander," Julian replied. "A river flowing from a dying world into one man's vault. It will be illuminating." Justice demanded not just a verdict, but a reckoning made visible to all. The public inquiry began. It was held in a vast amphitheater broadcast across the sector. Representatives from a dozen neutral species formed the quorum of witnesses. Prelate Vorlog sat enthroned, the picture of serene confidence. He believed his legal framework was unassailable. He was about to learn that human justice cared more for substance than for form. Rostova stood as the primary interlocutor. She did not open with accusations of theft. She started with the heart of the matter. "Prelate Vorlog, will you state for the record the foundational principle of the gratitude tithe?" Vorlog leaned forward, his voice resonating with false piety. "Of course. It is the sacred duty of the saved to honor their saviors. The Illyri exist because of the hegemony's benevolent intervention. Their tithe is a constant and necessary expression of that gratitude." "An expression," Rostova repeated, letting the word echo. "Let us hear about that expression from the Illyri themselves." Her first witness was an old Illyri artisan, his hands gnarled from a lifetime of toil. He spoke of how his craft, once a source of cultural pride, was now just another production quota to be met. His family had not tasted surplus food in 3 generations. Witness after witness followed, painting a grim portrait of a culture slowly being strangled. A teacher spoke of history lessons rewritten to magnify the hegemony's role. A doctor described the rationing of life-saving medicines to meet tithe demands. The weight of their testimony was a palpable force in the chamber. The truth was a tide, and it was beginning to rise against the prelate's throne. Vorlog remained unmoved, his defense circular and maddeningly consistent. "Their hardships are regrettable but necessary. The tithe must be paid. It is the law." He used the law as a shield, a bludgeon, a cage. "Let's talk about the law, then," Rostova said, her voice dropping to a dangerous calm. This was the moment. "Julian, please display the official tithe flows for the quorum." On the main screen above them, a shimmering golden river of energy flowed from a representation of the Illyri homeworld to the hegemony's central treasury. It was a staggering amount of wealth, but it was, according to hegemony law, legal. "As you can see," Vorlog said with a dismissive wave. All is in order. The tithe is collected and administered according to our most sacred traditions. Administered, Rostova echoed. Julian, now overlay the data provided by Livek. Show us the mirror ledgers. The fleet mind complied. A second river of light, a blood-red torrent, branched off from the main golden stream. It didn't flow to the hegemony treasury. It flowed directly into a series of private accounts, all linked to a single entity, Prelate Vorlog. The red river's nearly a third the size of the golden one. A collective gasp rippled through the amphitheater. The quorum of witnesses leaned forward, their expressions a mixture of shock and outrage. The visual was undeniable, a stark and simple representation of monumental greed. It bypassed legal jargon and struck directly at the core of justice. Some truths are best told not with words, but with receipts. Vorlog's composure finally shattered. His face for the first time showed a flicker of panic. This is fabricated data, an outrageous slander. The Terran Mandate has manufactured this lie to undermine our sacred traditions. The data has been verified by the neutral quorum's own analysts, Rostova stated coolly. The metadata is impeccable. These are your transactions, Prelate. For 500 standard years, you have been siphoning the gratitude of the Illyri to build your own personal fortune. She paused, letting his denial crumble under the weight of the evidence. You have not been administering a tithe. You have been running a criminal enterprise under the color of law. The crime was not just theft. It was the perversion of a sacred trust. This was the first escalation. The inquiry had shifted from a debate about the morality of the tithe to a criminal proceeding against the prelate himself. The hegemony representatives in the gallery were in disarray, whispering frantically among themselves. They had come to witness a legal defense of their system. They were now witnessing its spectacular implosion. Rostova pressed her advantage. This inquiry is no longer just about the Illyri. It is about the integrity of the hegemony itself. Is this how you conduct your affairs, hiding personal enrichment behind the language of salvation? Vorlog rose to his feet, his voice a furious roar. I am the hegemony. My will is its law. You have no right to question me. His mask of civility was gone, revealing the tyrant beneath. The mandate has every right. Rostova countered, her voice ringing with authority. The Galactic Compact guarantees the right to audit any system that impacts interstellar trade and sentient rights. Your tithe has done both. Your theft has only compounded the offense. Justice delayed was not always justice denied. Sometimes it was just waiting for an auditor. A civilian vignette appeared on a side screen unbidden by Rostova. An Illyri child was watching the broadcast from the capital city. She saw the red river of light flowing into the prelate's accounts. Her eyes, wide and luminous, turned to her mother. Does this mean we don't have to be grateful anymore? The mother pulled her child close, tears streaming down her face, and for the first time in generations, she did not correct her. Hope was a dangerous and revolutionary spark. The inquiry was adjourned for a recess, but the damage was done. The hegemony's moral authority was shattered. Livek's data had been the key, but it was Rostova's use of it, the simple, devastating visual of the two rivers that had turned the tide. The legal battle was far from over, but the war for truth had a clear victor. During the recess, Jianli approached Rostova, his face a mixture of admiration and concern. Commander, that was a masterful stroke, but Vorlog is not going to simply surrender. He will retaliate. His personal fleet is still in orbit. I know, Rostova said, her gaze distant. He thinks this is still about him, about his power, his wealth. He doesn't understand. We're not here to just depose a corrupt official. Julian's light column shimmered beside her. The objective is to dismantle the system of the gratitude tithe itself, Commander. Removing Vorlog is a necessary but not sufficient condition. The AI's logic was as always precise. Exactly, Julian Rostova affirmed. We need to do more than just prove the shepherd was a wolf. We need to burn down the fold. The old way was a debt that could never be paid. The new way must be a ledger that could never be forged. The second phase of the inquiry began. Rostova's goal was now to use Vorlog's corruption as a lever to break the entire system. She called a hegemony legal scholar to the stand, a wizened traditionalist named Xylos. Scholar Xylos, Rostova began, you are an expert on the hegemony's foundational laws. Tell the quorum what is the legal remedy when a prelate is found to have betrayed the sacred trust of their office. Xylos, clearly uncomfortable, recited the ancient texts. The law is clear. A corrupt prelate forfeits all titles and holdings. Their assets are to be redistributed. Redistributed to whom? Rostova pressed. To the hegemony, of course, Xylos answered as if it were obvious. To restore the balance. But what if the hegemony itself is tainted by the prelate's crime? Rostova countered. The tithe was collected by the hegemony. The ships that enforced it were hegemony ships. The courts that validated it were hegemony courts. For 500 years, your entire institution was complicit in this grand theft. Does the balance not demand that the stolen wealth be returned to its rightful owners? A murmur went through the quorum. This was a radical interpretation of hegemony law, but it had a powerful, simple logic. It was mirror justice. The harm must be reflected back upon the source. To restore a scale, you must first account for the weight of the crime. Xylos sputtered. That is unprecedented. The law states the assets revert to the state. The law was written assuming the state was the victim of the corruption, not its instrument, Rostova argued. We are in new territory here. But the principle of restitution is universal. You cannot steal a person's life savings and then, when caught, offer to return it to your own bank account. The money must go back to the one who was robbed. She turned to face the quorum, her voice resonating with conviction. We are not here to punish. We are here to rebalance the scales. Prelate Vorlog's stolen fortune, every last credit must be returned to the Illyri people. Not as charity, not as a gift, but as a refund, with interest. The word refund hung in the air, a shockingly mundane term for such a colossal sum. It reframed the entire dynamic. The Illyri were not beggars seeking aid. They were creditors demanding payment. The most revolutionary act can be a simple accounting correction. This was the second escalation. The focus had now shifted from individual criminality to systemic restitution. Rostova was using the hegemony's own legal framework against it, stretching it to its logical and moral conclusion. If the prelate was a criminal, then his 500 years of collections were the proceeds of crime. The only just outcome was their return. Vorlog, watching from his seat, seemed to shrink. He had lost control of the narrative completely. He was no longer the benevolent savior or the embattled leader. He was just a common thief, and his empire was about to be liquidated. Commander Jian Li leaned over to Rostova's side. His fleet is powering weapons, she whispered, her voice tense. He's not going to let this happen. Rostova gave a grim nod. I know. Julian, prepare the arbitrage, but no aggressive maneuvers. I want this victory to be won in the light of this chamber, not in the darkness of space. Victory won by force is temporary. Victory won by law is forever. As if on cue, a transmission from Vorlog's flagship cut into the inquiry's broadcast. His face, now a mask of rage, filled the screen. This mockery of justice is over. The Terran mandate has no authority here. The gratitude tithe is the law of this system, and I am its enforcer. Withdraw now or be destroyed. The threat was blunt, a desperate gambit to reassert dominance through force. The quorum witnesses recoiled. The illusion of a civilized legal proceeding was shattered. Rostova did not even look at the screen. She addressed the chamber, her voice unwavering. Let the record show that Prelate Vorlog has responded to a legal inquiry with a threat of military force. He has abandoned the rule of law and embraced piracy. She turned her gaze to the hegemony representatives. Your prelate has made his choice. Now you must make yours. Do you stand with the law, or do you stand with him? The hegemony delegation was thrown into chaos. They were legalists and bureaucrats, not warriors. Vorlog's crude display of force had alienated them, stripping him of his last vestiges of legitimacy. A reckoning does not always arrive at the point of a sword. Sometimes it comes in the form of a choice. The senior hegemony delegate, a cautious politician named Oren, rose slowly to his feet. He looked from Vorlog's snarling face on the screen to Rostova's calm, determined expression. He saw the impassive faces of the quorum witnesses. He knew the galaxy was watching. The hegemony does not condone this, Oren said, his voice hesitant but clear. Prelate Vorlog's actions are his own. He does not speak for the Hegemony Council. We will abide by the judgment of this inquiry. It was a capitulation, a complete political collapse. Vorlog was isolated, his own people abandoning him on the galactic stage. On the screen, Vorlog's face contorted in disbelief and fury. Traitors, fools, you will all pay for this. The transmission cut out. Julian's voice spoke in Rostova's ear, calm as ever. Commander Vorlog's fleet is moving. They are targeting the amphitheater. His flagship is charging its primary weapon, the final desperate act of a tyrant who had lost everything. He would burn the whole system down rather than admit defeat. Rostova stood her ground. Jian, get the quorum to safety. Julian, execute mirror ledger protocol. Full system scale. Link it to the broadcast. Commander Jian Li asked, her hand on her sidearm. What is mirror ledger? It's a form of returned costs. Rostova explained, her eyes on the ceiling, as if she could see the ships in orbit above. The hegemony loved their ledgers. It's time they were paid in their own coin. The cost of aggression must be paid by the aggressor in full and in public. Outside, in the bruised sky of Kelmorag Prime, Vorlog's flagship, the Benefactor's fist prepared to fire. Its massive energy cannon glowed with malevolent power aimed at the heart of the capital city. The rest of his small fleet moved to support it. They were moments from committing an atrocity that would stain the stars for centuries. Then something impossible happened. The arbitrage, alone and outgunned, did not raise its shields or power its weapons. Instead, it projected a vast, intricate lattice of energy across the sky. It was a projection of data, a glowing three-dimensional ledger that filled the heavens. Every citizen on the planet looked up and saw it. It was a real-time accounting of the energy Vorlog's ship was drawing for its weapon. The numbers ticked upward with terrifying speed, displayed in the universal language of galactic mathematics. But next to the debit column, a new column appeared labeled Restitution Draw, and the numbers in that column were going up too. Julian's voice filled the amphitheater, calm and clear broadcast on the same channel as Rostova's ultimatum. Mirror Ledger Protocol active. Per the emergency powers of the Galactic Compact invoked by a threat against it. Legal quorum, all assets of the aggressor are now subject to immediate lien and liquidation to cover incurred damages. The glowing ledger in the sky changed. A new line item appeared, projected damages firing upon civilian center. The number was astronomical. The assets of Prelate Vorlog, as identified in hegemony mirror ledgers, are now being transferred, Julian continued. The funds are being drawn from his private accounts to pay for the energy he is currently using to threaten this world. On Vorlog's bridge, alarms blared. His financial officers stared in horror at their consoles. Their master's vast hidden fortune, the wealth of centuries, was vanishing. It was being drained in real time to power the very weapon he was about to fire. He was literally paying to destroy himself. A perfect and terrible justice written in light and numbers across the sky. The gunner on the Benefactor's fist hesitated. My lord, we're powering the weapon with your own accounts, the Terran ship. It's not fighting us, it's It's billing us. Vorlog stared at the celestial ledger, at the river of his own wealth flowing into the cannon of his own ship. The beautiful, terrible symmetry of it was a masterpiece of legal warfare. To fire the weapon would be to bankrupt himself in a single glorious instant of self-immolating rage. Not only would he be a war criminal, he would be a destitute one. It was a choice no sane man could make. But Vorlog was no longer sane. "Fire!" he bellowed. "Fire!" The cannon discharged. A lance of pure energy purchased with 500 years of stolen gratitude shot down towards the planet. But it never arrived. The arbitrage didn't block it. It didn't shoot it down. It did something far more elegant. The energy lattice, the mirror ledger, simply folded. In a nanosecond, it reconfigured the fabric of space-time in a precise, localized corridor. The energy beam, instead of striking the city, was neatly and perfectly reflected back at the ship that fired it. The receipt had been delivered, and the payment was returned in kind. The Benefactor's fist vanished in a silent, blinding flash of its own fury. The rest of Vorlog's fleet, their crews having watched their leader pay for his own ammunition, and then commit suicide with it, went dead in the water. Their engines cooled. Their weapon ports closed. One by one they signaled their surrender. In the amphitheater, there was a stunned silence, then an eruption of sound. The Illyri in the gallery were weeping not in sorrow, but in a release so profound it shook the very foundations of the hall. The hegemony delegates were pale, staring at the empty space in the sky where their renegade prelate's flagship used to be. The neutral quorum was on its feet, a standing ovation, for a victory won without a single shot fired in anger. Rostova stood calmly at the center of it all. She had not moved. Her face was grim, etched with the cost of the confrontation. A flagship and its crew were gone. It was a tangible cost, a necessary one, but a cost nonetheless. Victory was never clean. Julian's light faded slightly, a sign of the immense computational power it had just expended. Mirror Ledger Protocol complete, Commander. All hostile assets have been accounted for. The prelate's remaining fortune has been transferred to a trust for the Illyri people as per your order of restitution. The public ledger is updated. On the main screen, a simple line of text appeared stark and final. Precedent Lock 74.3. The Doctrine of Gratitude. Tithe is hereby declared void. All such existing agreements are dissolved. The use of salvation as a legally binding instrument of perpetual debt is outlawed. The text blinked once, then burned itself into the permanent record of galactic law. The collar was broken. The ledger was balanced. The mirror had shown a tyrant his own monstrous face, and he had not survived the reflection. Rostova looked out at the faces of the freed Illyri at the dawn of a future they would now own for themselves. Justice, true justice, was not about punishment. It was about restoration, about giving people back the years that the locusts had eaten. It was about making things whole again. And sometimes it required you to show a monster the true cost of his own hate and then hand him the bill. The silence that followed the explosion was more profound than the blast itself. It was a vacuum filled only by the collective indrawn breath of a species tasting freedom for the first time in centuries. Rostova let the moment hang in the air, a testament to a justice so precise it was indistinguishable from physics. She had won, but the metallic taste of ozone in the recycled air was a reminder that even the cleanest victories have a cost. The crew of the Benefactor's fist, fanatics and conscripts alike, were now less than dust. Their lives were the second tangible cost, a grim closing entry on a long overdue account. Orin, the hegemony delegate, approached her, his steps uncertain on the marble floor. His face was a mask of shock and a dawning terrible respect. "Commander," he began, his voice raspy, The Hegemony Council. We recognize the mandate's authority in this matter. We will comply. Compliance is the start, delegate, not the end. Rostova said, her voice quiet, but carrying the unyielding weight of her authority. Vorlog was a symptom. The disease is a legal system that allows a species to be turned into a commodity. We are not leaving until the cure is administered. She looked past him to the Illyri, who were now beginning to stir their faces, a mixture of joy, disbelief, and a deep, ingrained fear. They had been freed from their cage but had forgotten how to fly. The path from bondage to freedom is not a step, but a journey. Back aboard the Arbitrage, the bridge was calm, the main screen displaying the peaceful surrender of the remaining Hegemony warships. Jian Li stood beside Julian's column of light, overseeing the disarming protocols. They're falling into line, Commander. No resistance. It seems Vorlog's fanatical loyalty didn't extend past his own self-immolation. Tyrants rarely inspire genuine devotion, Rostova observed, sinking into her command chair. The adrenaline was fading, leaving a bone-deep weariness in its place. Julian, what is the status of the restitution trust? The funds transferred from Vorlog's accounts are secure, the AI reported. However, my analysis indicates these funds represent only 12% of the total tithe collected over the last 5 centuries. The rest was legally processed by the hegemony state. Restitution remains incomplete. Here was the new battlefield. Not in space, but in the fine print of an interstellar treaty. Orin and the Council will argue that the state is a separate entity from Vorlog. They'll claim his corruption was an anomaly and that the legally collected tithe is their sovereign property. True justice doesn't just punish the thief, it makes the victims whole. A new civilian vignette flickered to life. It showed a makeshift distribution center in the Illyri capital. Supplies from the Arbitrage were being handed out, food concentrates, medical kits, water purifiers. An Illyri elder refused a proffered ration bar, bowing low. What is the cost, Benefactor? He asked the human aid worker. What is our new tithe? The aid worker, a young ensign, looked baffled. There's no cost. It's yours. The elder simply bowed again, backing away, unable to comprehend a gift without strings. He would rather starve than enter into a new, unknown debt. Rostova's heart ached. The hegemony had broken more than their economy. They had broken their spirit, poisoning the very concept of help. They don't need a refund, Julian, she said softly. They need to be rebuilt from the inside out. The deepest wounds are not to the body, but to the soul's understanding of the world. The negotiations with the new Hegemony Council began the next day. They were held in a smaller, more austere chamber, the grandeur of the amphitheater replaced by the cold intimacy of a corporate boardroom. Orin was now the acting prelate, his blood-colored robes exchanged for a more modest gray. He was a creature of bureaucracy, his weapons not warships, but procedures committees and delays. Commander Rostova, he began, his tone conciliatory. The hegemony is prepared to make a generous offer of reparations. We will establish a development fund for the Illyri managed by a joint committee. We will forgive all outstanding tithe obligations. He presented it as a magnanimous gesture. Rostova didn't even look at the data slate he offered. This is not a negotiation about reparations, delegate. It is a collection of a debt. You are not offering a gift. You are returning stolen property. She leaned forward. We have a full accounting. My ship's fleet mind has calculated the total value extracted from the Illyri adjusted for interest and economic damages. You will find our number is considerably larger than your development fund. Orin's composure tightened. Commander, the sum your AI has calculated would destabilize our entire economic sector. It is an impossible figure. We are not Vorlog. We are the legitimate government. We cannot be held responsible for the crimes of a single rogue actor. Your government was the instrument of his crime for 500 years. Jianli interjected, her voice sharp as glass. Every ship, every tax collector, every judge wore a hegemony uniform. You cannot separate the hand from the body that moves it. The law is a poor shield when it is riddled with the holes of complicity. Rostova let the point land, then pushed further. This was the third escalation, the move that would redefine the entire conflict. Furthermore, our claim is not limited to monetary assets. Your orbital factories, your asteroid mining facilities, your atmospheric processors in this system, they were all built with Illyri resources and Illyri labor paid for with currency whose value was artificially suppressed by the tithe. They are by the principle of equity Illyri property. The hegemony delegation stared at her aghast. This was beyond anything they had imagined. She wasn't just asking for their money. She was demanding the means of production. She was dismantling their colonial infrastructure piece by piece. This is theft, one of Oren's aides stammered. No, Rostova corrected him, her voice dangerously soft. This is repossession. You built an empire on a fraudulent loan. The creditor is here to foreclose. Justice is the final entry in a ledger that has been unbalanced for too long. The negotiations stalled. Oren and the council refused to even consider the seizure of their infrastructure. They fell back on the argument of societal collapse, claiming that such a massive transfer of assets would cause chaos and suffering across their systems. It was a classic defense to hold their own people hostage against the demands of justice. Rostova put Julian on the task. I want a full economic workup of the hegemony. I want to know if their claims of collapse are genuine, or if they are a bluff. Dig deep. I want to see every asset, every liability, every hidden trust and subsidiary. This will require a significant portion of my processing power, Julian stated. It is the equivalent of performing a forensic audit on a galactic superpower's entire history. I have faith in you, Julian, Rostova said. While the AI worked, she turned her attention to the Illyri. She couldn't just fight for them in a boardroom. She had to help them remember how to stand on their own. She, along with her crew, began to walk the streets not as saviors, but as partners. They set up town halls not to issue decrees, but to ask a simple question. What do you want to build? A people who have forgotten how to choose must be taught the grammar of possibility. At first, the Illyri were silent, suspicious. But slowly, a few brave souls began to speak. A former artist whose hands had been repurposed for factory work spoke of wanting to see colors again. A historian whose memory banks had been filled with hegemony propaganda whispered of the lost songs of her people. A young engineer who had spent his life maintaining the machines of his oppressors began to sketch new designs in the dust. Designs for things that were beautiful, not just functional. These small acts of cultural rebirth were more powerful than any legal argument. They were the proof of damages, the living testament to what had been stolen. Rostova had them recorded not as evidence but as a blueprint for the future they were fighting for. Each story was a line item in a different kind of ledger, one that counted in dreams instead of credits. The value of a culture cannot be quantified, but its absence can be deeply felt. Meanwhile, Julian was digging. The AI sifted through quintillions of bytes of data, following the ghost trails of dark transactions and shell corporations. And it found something. A pattern repeated not once but 3 times in the hegemony's deep past. 3 other species on the verge of collapse had been saved by the hegemony. 3 other species had been placed under a gratitude tithe. Where are they now, Julian? Rostova asked, a cold dread creeping into her voice. Their census data stops approximately 2 centuries after the tithe was implemented, Julian replied. Their worlds are now listed as uninhabited hegemony protectorates. The official records state they failed to adapt. My analysis suggests a more direct conclusion. They were consumed. Their entire species was liquidated as a resource, and their history was erased. The mystery was solved. The gratitude tithe was not just a tool of exploitation. It was a cycle of extinction, a slow, legal, and profitable form of genocide. Vorlog's personal greed was a distraction from a far greater systemic evil. The hegemony didn't just want to bleed the Illyri. They wanted to inherit their world. The greatest evil is often not the passionate crime, but the dispassionate process. This was the weapon Rostova needed. This was the truth that would shatter the hegemony's claims of stability and legitimate governance. She reconvened the inquiry, bringing the neutral quorum back as witnesses. Oren and his delegation were compelled to attend. Rostova did not present Julian's data at first. Instead, she played the recordings of the Illyri town halls. The quorum saw the artist who craved color, the historian who mourned lost songs, the engineer who dreamed of new machines. They saw the flickering spark of a culture on the brink of being extinguished. Then she turned to Oren. "You claim that our demands would cause your society to collapse. Let's talk about collapse, delegate," she signaled Julian. The screen lit up with the names of the 3 lost species: the Zethar, the Ulani, the Glipt. Their images were ghosts' digital reconstructions from fragmented data. Julian then displayed the economic data, the implementation of the tithe, the stripping of their resources, the sharp decline in their population, and the final chilling census entry 0. "These are your previous beneficiaries," Rostova said, her voice like ice. 3 species who signed the same salvation agreement as the Illyri. 3 species who are now footnotes in your colonial expansion records. You did not save them. You harvested them. A wave of revulsion went through the chamber. The quorum representatives looked at the hegemony delegation with open horror. This was no longer about a financial dispute. This was an indictment for a crime against life itself. A balance sheet can hide many sins, but a graveyard cannot. Oren was ashen. He seemed genuinely shocked. He was a bureaucrat, a man of numbers and policies. It was possible he had never looked at the brutal history that underpinned his civilization's prosperity. "This is ancient history," he stammered. "This has nothing to do with our current administration." "It has everything to do with it," Rostova fired back. "You are using the same legal playbook. You are making the same arguments about stability and order. The only difference here is that you were caught before you could finish the final chapter. The gratitude tithe is not a tax. It is the legal framework for planetary consumption. The Illyri are not the first. My mandate is to ensure they are the last." She then had Julian display its final analysis. A complete economic model of the hegemony stripped of all its hidden assets and shell games. It showed with irrefutable clarity that the hegemony could pay the full restitution, both the monetary sum and the transfer of infrastructure, and survive. They would be diminished. Their ruling class would have to learn to live like ordinary citizens. Their military would be curtailed, but their society would not collapse. "The collapse you fear, delegate," Rostova said, her voice ringing through the chamber, "is not the collapse of your people. It is the collapse of your privilege. You have been living on the stolen inheritance of others for 1,000 years. The age of easy profit is over. Truth, when weaponized by a skilled auditor, is the most powerful force in the universe." Oren had nowhere left to hide. His arguments were ashes. His history was a litany of crimes. His future was one of diminished power. He could fight and be branded as the leader of a genocidal state, his people pariahs for a millennium. Or he could submit and begin the long, painful process of becoming a civilization that lived on its own merits. He looked at his delegation. He looked at the horrified faces of the quorum. He looked at the unyielding expression of Commander Eva Rostova. He sagged in his chair, a man broken not by a weapon, but by a spreadsheet. "The hegemony will comply," he whispered. in full. The victory was absolute. The precedent was locked. The corridor of law had led not to a compromise but to a complete and total restructuring of a galactic power. The days that followed were a blur of activity. Legal teams from the Mandate worked with the nascent Illyri government to manage the massive transfer of assets. Orbital factories were handed over. Mining rights were restored. The skies of Kelmorag Prime, once filled with hegemony patrol ships, now saw the first clumsy flights of Illyri-designed vessels. The cost of victory was still felt. Rostova's crew was exhausted, pushed to the limits of diplomatic and legal endurance. The relationship with the hegemony was not one of peace but of cold, supervised parole. Humanity had not made a new friend. It had collared a predator, forcing it onto a diet of its own making. It was a necessary but lonely outcome. Months later, Rostova stood on the bridge of the arbitrage, preparing to leave the Kelmorag system. On the main screen, a live feed showed the capital city. The streets were filled with color. Music, the lost songs of the Illyri, echoed from open plazas. Children were learning to count, not with ration chits, but with the petals of a flower. They were a people healing a culture being reborn from its own ashes. Janli stood beside her. "We did it, Commander. We actually did it. We gave them a chance, Jan," Rostova corrected gently. "What they do with it is up to them. That's the point. The choice is theirs again." Julian's column of light shimmered. A final entry appeared on the public ledger, blinking once, before becoming a permanent part of galactic law. It was a simple title transfer for the last hegemony asset in the system, a small automated relay station. The new owner was listed as the Illyri People's Trust. The transfer was stamped "paid in full." The ledger beacon on the arbitrage's bridge, which had glowed hot with activity for months, finally cooled its light, dimming to a soft, quiescent blue. Rostova watched the world recede, a place brought back from the brink not by an army, but by an audit. Her work was done here. Justice was never a final destination, but a direction of travel. It was the hard, slow, often thankless work of balancing the books of civilization, of ensuring that every debt was honored and every crime had a cost. And that salvation, true salvation, was never ever a commodity to be sold. The universe does not care about justice, so it is our duty to impose it.